Our next session is going to focus on the earthquake that occurred this past November, the evolving political landscape among black voters. So please welcome Ruy Teixeira, who's also a senior fellow at AEI, along with Wilfred Reilly and Patrick Ruffini, to talk about the shifting black vote.
Great, thanks. Great to be here. It's been a great conference. I suppose I should introduce Will Reilly and Patrick Ruffini, for those people who don't know. Patrick is co-founder of Echelon Insights, a fantastic Republican-oriented polling firm, and I just think Patrick in general is one of our most astute political analysts. He has a Substack called Intersections. It's very good. And of course, his fantastic book. Give us the full title there, Patrick.
Party of the People Inside the Multiracial Populist Coalition, Remaking the GOP, a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, though. Fantastic book. If you read Patrick's book and you read my book with John Judas, Where Have All the Democrats Gone, you pretty much know everything you need to know to understand recent political trends, particularly the 2024 election. We also have Will Reilly here. He's associate professor, I guess, at Kentucky State. Is that right?
Yeah, haven't gone up for full.
Right, okay. And he's a prolific commentator and analyst, and he publishes in a wide variety of places. And you have a new book, right? Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me? Is that the right title?
Yes, available at Amazon and fine local booksellers near you. Also, box of free copies under the table.
There you go. And also he has previous books called, the one I read that really knocked me out was Taboo. About all the subjects, things you couldn't talk about that were nevertheless kind of true, which is not irrelevant to what we're going to be talking about here today. In fact, Will, I think you had a comment you wanted to make on one of the last things that was said in the luxury belief session that kind of gets at some of the things that you've been trying to bring empirical light to bear on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to Rob Henderson, who I've heard before, for a good talk. And I didn't want to shout this out from the audience after my comment that land acknowledgements should just be the words they lost. But Ian Rowe mentioned that there was some confusion in the public square about police shooting statistics. I think this is less true, especially for kind of the center right today. But when Skeptic Research Center polled on this in 2022, they found that among liberals, 31.7, one of these gentlemen may correct me, about 32% of people thought that the average number of unarmed black men killed by the police every year was around 1,000. And another 15.6% of people, this is in the liberal category only, but not leftist, nothing crazy, they thought it was about 10,000. Per year, about 10,000.
Yeah.
Now, there are only 20,000 murders in the USA in a typical year. African Americans responsible for maybe half. So the idea was that the number of unprovoked police shootings was very closely equivalent to the number of murders. And as a very quick follow-up comment, I think it's obvious that beliefs like this do influence society. There was a bit of a very friendly disagreement between Ian and Dr. Kearney, I believe, earlier about sort of the role of the family. And one of the comments that was made is you can't really track family collapse to feminism or critical theory or something like that, because the most professional, most successful women are still getting married. There's some truth there. I mean, I think everyone's a first wave feminist today to some extent, in the sense that women obviously should be able to vote, and drive, and hold executive jobs. But the counterpoint to that general argument is the idea of luxury belief, right? That very often new movements are accepted least by members of the upper middle class and the ruling class. Only the few most useful bits are used. So the idea of sort of you don't need no man if you want to have a family, I think is growing up in a working class neighborhood is extremely prevalent. There was one year when two of the most prominent hip hop and R&B songs, I believe, were Single Ladies and Independent by Lil Boosie. I'm IND, anyway. So it's hard to believe that did not have an impact on the ordinary working or middle class woman's decisions about marriage and child rearing, along with some male failures in quality and so on. That's obviously sort of a variable there. So yeah, I believe these beliefs do significantly influence society. That was my response to Ian there.
Okay, well, we'll get more into that, into sort of general ideas some of these beliefs may and affect black politics and sort of some of the relevant trends. But first, let's get into what those trends are. So Patrick, I could bring up some of these facts, but why do it when you're here with me? You're the biggest expert that there is. What have been the shifts in the black vote, and where have they been concentrated? You know, how much was just in the last election? How much has been over time?
Yeah, so in the last election, I mean, we saw a shift, an overall shift among non-white voters, regardless, and I think that's the most important, thing to mention right across the board. That when people talk about the shifts that happened in the last election, they talk specifically about Hispanic voters shifting another 20 points to the right. You talk to some extent about Asian American voters, the shift that happened in 2020. But I think the black vote is very much overlooked. It's a very different dynamic. The exit polls say, Trump went from, and there were different measures, right? We have now competition in the exit polls now, but it was either 8 or 12% in 2020, and he went to either 13 or 16 this time. Doesn't sound like a big shift, right? I mean, it's only a couple points, 4 or 5 points, right? Why do we care? Well, add 40 points to that, right? If there was a demographic that went from 48 to 53, that's the difference between victory and defeat. That's kind of a big deal, right? That's kind of significant. Now, the shifts specifically within, I think, because there's, probably a huge portion of the black community that's still, let's say, at the moment, not gettable for Republicans. But among the groups that are, specifically younger voters and younger males, there's just dramatic shifts. We have evidence about 20% of black men voted for Trump, about either 25 to almost 30% of younger black males voted for Trump. And why does that matter? And those demographics are the opposite, I think, of what we've come to expect when we talk about voter demographics. When you talk about, it used to be, kind of older voters are more Republican, younger voters are more Democratic. It's actually the opposite in the black community, and that's a function of, perhaps fading memories of the civil rights era. This Democratic monolith loyalty that we've seen in the black community was shaped in the 1960s. It is more prevalent among older voters. Black women continue to be very strong Democrats, but basically anyone who doesn't fit in those demographics is subject to rapid movement because this, what I would call a social norm, right? A social norm of just monolithic, unified Democratic support is eroding. And it's eroding, among those groups that feel less attachment, potentially feel less attachment, whether because of their generation, because of where they live, because of the social circumstances by which they're surrounded. That is where you're seeing the most movement.
Yeah, I mean, I have some data here that indicate the margin for Democrats among black voters compared to 2012. Among those under 30, there's been a decline of 40 points in the margin. But among those 65 and older, there's been a decline, but it's only like 6 or 7 points. So that's just a massive difference. Why is it, you think, is part of this a sort of steadfast voters thing, that they're not as connected to the networks in the black community that sort of almost keep people tracked in on voting for the Democrats? What's really the mechanism here?
I think that this is true among non-white voters overall, but it's especially true, right, among black voters. Is it's not like you don't have black conservatives. It's not like you don't have black moderates. It's not like you look at the ideology figures among black voters, among Hispanic voters. They look, I wouldn't say exactly the same as white voters, but they look pretty similar. It's not. It's very different from the you would not predict the voting pattern just purely based on ideology, and it's because it's not an ideological vote. Never has been an ideological vote. It's been, it's been a vote. Obviously, it is a group interest, a perceived group interest vote, right? And what happens when it shifts from being a group interest vote to being an ideological vote, where you have conservatives, my favorite crosstab possibly of the last few election cycles. If you break down voters by race and ideology, you've seen these massive 40-point shifts among people who say they are black conservatives.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and that's maybe a little bit different than some of the folks in the room in terms of how they would describe themselves. But you're just seeing people who are just coming into greater alignment with, if you have more conservative cultural values, you're now voting more with the party of the right. Back during the Obama era, you have 80+%, Barack Obama won 80+% of black conservatives. Now the Democrats are only winning about 50%
it's about
of black
half and half.
50% of black conservatives. What's it among white conservatives? It's about 90-10 for Republicans. So I would say that there's still a lot of room to fall here.
Right. Well, Will, what's your view on that? Why are people more starting to vote their ideology in the black community? What has led them in this direction? Is it just Trump, really? Do they really like especially Trump? Or are they, they're unleashing their inner conservative, which had been, for whatever reason, tamped down, and there are aspects of the Republican Party they're just realizing they like or they never considered before? What's it all about?
Well, I'd say there are three things there, actually, like just prepping for my speech. One of them, just first in background, for my very first book, which came out of my dissertation, I found exactly what Patrick is describing, that the ideological breakdown of the black community was extremely varied. And the interesting thing for me was that it didn't match partisan breakdown at all. So for whites, as you guys just said, you see this enormous overlap, 90% overlap very often. For African Americans, we were doing this in St. Louis, we were doing this in Carbondale. We had about, I think it was 48% moderates in the sample. We had about 40% liberals, and then we had some conservatives. And that was still, about 15%, maybe more than that, 12, but that's a collegiate sample largely, that were on the right. And almost all of those people, to the extent that they voted. And another issue is that there's a fairly low rate of voting in the African American community. So, the simple fact that most voters that turn out vote Democrat does not necessarily mean that most black people are strongly identified Democrats. But I think you're seeing that pattern shifting. That has something to do with trends among younger voters. But in terms of just, I don't need to look at my notes here. There were three patterns that I found just looking through recent research and looking through some public media as well. One is that black voters, like all voters, were concerned with actual trends in the country. So, following the George Floyd riots, we saw murders rise above 20,000 per year for the first time since the mid-1990s. That specifically devastated African American communities. We saw mass illegal migration, frankly. 8 to 12 million, the Fox News figure is a very high figure, but we did see very large numbers of people coming across the border within a pretty concentrated period of time, very often competing directly for sort of working class jobs with African American voters. We all heard about the price of eggs and so on. So a lot of people went out and voted for practical issues just as everyone else did. The last president was dead for the last 2 years of his term, which I think it may have
technically still breathing.
May have impacted his viability. He was close. A final comment. I think that another thing that comes up in addition to shifting age demographic patterns, in addition to real issues, is discomfort with the weird woke direction the Democrats took. I find that frequently when I myself do small scale sampling or even social media polling among African Americans. But some specific figures, like 66% of black Democrats, 49% of Hispanic Democrats, as versus only 27% of white Democrats, think that you cannot change your sex or gender.
Right.
Very well-known data. This recently became a major public issue. 75% African Americans, 88% of Native Americans oppose politically correct culture that's centered among basically educated younger white women. So I think you're starting to see some of this data play out.
But hasn't it always been true that black population is overwhelmingly moderate to conservative, and they've always been less liberal than the mainstream of the Democratic Party to a large extent? Why now? Is it just like the wokeness has gotten, sort of the liberalism has gotten too liberal? What's been the breaking point there? Because people have argued for a long time, both Hispanics and blacks tend to be more conservative in social issues than white liberals, for example. But yet, it's really only recently that this has come to the fore.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting deep background issues here is that the idea that demography is destiny, I think, has been disproved. in the recent major polls in the last election. And this is something that's been very widely discussed. I mean, you yourself wrote The Emerging Democratic Majority.
Guilty as charged.
No, I enjoyed the book. That wasn't a dart at a co-panelist. Come on, I mean, but I mean, like, there was a coherent case made there that at least we might be seeing a very strong progressive future for the USA, and you were not alone in saying that. And by the way, we've done this on the right at least as much, right? The Great Replacement, the demographic Democratic doom, all this sort of stuff. In reality, I think that there's been a lot of wonder, a lot of worry about that. When you see 46% of Hispanic voters, 52% of Hispanic male voters going GOP, I think we can now pretty confidently say that is at very least not foreordained. Why did that change happen? I do think woke had something to do with it. I mean, if you remember, Barack Obama opposed gay marriage in 2008. I think he may have in 2012. So we've seen a very, very steep kind of ski slope tangent in social change that almost no one wants at some level in very recent modern society. I haven't done professional research on this, but I can't imagine that didn't play a role. And the second thing, I think, the appeal of the Democrats for the black community, to a very large extent, is the GOP is racist. And I think that as we move further and further away from 1964, as we've had the Civil Rights Act in place, some level of affirmative action for 61 years, that becomes less plausible. We'll see if the alt-right, that group, can manage to torpedo these GOP gains, by the way. You log onto Twitter or Facebook and you see pages with names like Black People Taking L's, and which has 200,000 followers, mostly American, and you do wonder if
There's
the
a
resurgence.
lot of crazy out there, yeah.
But is it? I don't know. Like that's another question, right? Is the internet reality? Like, are the 200,000 followers of Black People Taking L's, or the equivalent, I expose white pedos and racists? And the names are funny, but that has 170,000 followers. These are real sites. Are there that many bigots out there, or are these bots? Are these people actually living in Bangalore? I think that there's work to be done there.
A lot of bots out there. Well, Patrick, what do you think? I certainly buy the idea that, argued in my book with John Judas, that cultural radicalism, as opposed to simply being pretty liberal, has really kind of taken over the Democratic Party in the last, say, 10 years or so, 15 years, and that's got to have been a factor pushing non-white, particularly working class voters, away from the Democratic Party. But what about the economic part of this? I mean, isn't part of the reason why, for example, blacks were on the side of the Democrats for so many years? They thought, having Democrats in office would benefit them, and they would provide them with upward mobility and the programs and services they needed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is part of it also that, not only just the short-term hit from the inflation spike when Biden was in office, pushing people away, but less faith perhaps that the Democrats provide the environment, the vehicle for upward economic mobility. To some extent, the theme of this conference is not. In other words, is it not just cultural? Does it go far beyond that to the question of economic philosophy?
I think gradually, right? It's sort of it's the gradually then suddenly, right? Saying, but I think gradually the Democrats have lost that identity, right, as being the party of the downtrodden and of the working class, right? Partly that's a function of, well, our society has gotten. I mean, the base of working class voters has actually shrunk in society, and so the politics, right, of that has shifted, perhaps. But I was struck by a YouGov poll, I think, put in the last week, where they asked Democrats, what makes a good Democrat, right? What beliefs do you need to have to be a good Democrat? And I'm paraphrasing here, but literally, like, the top 5 beliefs were you need to support LGBTQ people. You need to, support DEI. You need to support. There's all these cultural beliefs.
Right,
I didn't even see anything for stand up for the working class. Right. I didn't even see that in terms of the identity. And I think in the Black community, it has been a gradual shift post-Obama. And I think you can't ignore the candidate contrast here. I mean, you go from the first Black president against the whitest Republican candidate like you could imagine, in Mitt Romney, right, or John McCain, right. That contrast makes it so that you have sky-high Black turnout, and the Republican vote's at 4%, right? I mean, it's tiny, right? I mean, it's quadruple, doubled or triple. I mean, I would encourage everyone to just look at the Black vote in terms of multiply it compared to the previous Republican performance, and the small percentages, it is kind of an epidemic growth curve at this point. But under Trump, right, he does have this more populist affect. He does shift the Republican Party into, a party that's even on attributes like cares like people like you, right? That was always the Democratic calling card, right? In terms of they always trusted the Democrats to stand up for working people like you. Now that's split 50-50, pretty remarkable. So I think that, that is definitely part of it. It has been gradual, but in the last 3 successive elections, we've seen Trump consistently grow his share of the vote in the black community. Now, what happened even in 2020, after George Floyd, after BLM, he grew his share of the black vote. Also, black turnout has declined from its Obama-era highs. And, if Democrats are relying on these 90-10 margins, and particularly in these urban neighborhoods, sometimes upwards of 95%, the real threat isn't necessarily, you have a few people, you have 8 Republican votes in a precinct as opposed to 3 for a Republican candidate. The real threat is the turnout, right? That raw Democratic number going down, which creates serious problems in cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, in those big blue wall states. They need that black turnout, and they're not getting it anymore.
Well, Will, what do you think? I mean, breaking it down between economic and cultural factors pushing black voters, particularly young, particularly male black, away from the Democratic Party. You were actually just talking about the cultural factors. So how do you factor in the economic stuff? I mean, and how do you differentiate those? Or maybe to some extent, economics is culture for a lot of these voters.
Yeah, I think Patrick just gave a good breakdown of how economics can be culture when you look at what was traditionally the working man's party listing every top priority as a culture war issue, which even the Republicans don't do. Again, I haven't done professional polling on that particular issue, but from what I've read and in my own opinion, a major conflict within the Democratic Party is about how to be a Democrat or how to be a person on the left. This is why Bernie Sanders has problems with the Democrats. This is why Bernie Sanders has been picketed on stage by black women carrying signs that say Bernie doesn't care. Bernie's perspective, as far as I can tell, is sort of old school vulgar Marxism.
The billionaire class.
Well, yeah, it used to be the millionaire and billionaire class. Then he did pretty well with a couple of his volumes and
it's the
bought
billionaire class.
the lake
They're
house.
the real problem. Billionaire class, not so bad.
I hope maybe someday he'll make enough money to say the predatory billionaire class or the mega billionaires, the tech billionaires. But I mean, Bernie Sanders' perspective is that the goal of the working person's party, Main Street is versus Wall Street, whether you like him as an honorable opponent or not, is to help working people. And there are traditionally things that have been associated with that, obviously child care, health care, unionization, support for the major unions, so on down the line. The modern Democratic candidates don't talk about that stuff very much. My personal opinion is that one reason they don't is that they can't. If you look at donations to the Democratic Party, which both of you have, you now see that they come even more overwhelmingly than they used to from the very upper end of society. And you see that reflects a transition in wealth in the United States, in my opinion. So wealth in America no longer means all steel or ConAgra or someone building a bunch of railroad train cars. I mean, at the very upper end, it mostly means tech, where the wealthiest men in the world are Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and you see all of these people like feudal lords at the inauguration of every president of either party. And most of those people, with the exception of Musk to some extent, tend to be ideologically left. They don't tend to be strong supporters of unionization, to put it very mildly. So the Democrats face a sort of a conundrum about what they're supposed to be. Their strongest supporters right now are upper middle class, college educated women, mostly single. That seems to be the defining base of the party. And those are very often the people that are furthest to the left on race issues, by the way, and LGBT issues. There's a joke in my community, which is suburban Louisville, that if you drive through a neighborhood that has a bunch of Black Lives Matter signs on the lawn, it is an upper class, all white area. That is one of the easiest ways to identify a soccer mom sort of community, a gated sort of community. So those are the voters, and I mean the donors are some of the richest men in the world. So I have to think that if you're an African-American guy in Detroit, you're looking around and thinking that classic line that we sometimes use on the right? I mean, One party who's been in power here for 80 years. It looks like bombs hit this area. What would be wrong with making the other choice? And that's more plausible if you don't hear a coherent economic package from the left-wing party, from the center-left party.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, but let's look at what's going on today. I mean, Democrats would say, if they were here, I'll channel their point of view. They would say, well, okay, Biden administration, they made a lot of mistakes. Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate. There was misinformation thrown at voters, et cetera, et cetera. But look at what Trump's now done. Look at what he's doing with the crazy tariff regime, the economic uncertainty. Black support for Trump and the Republican Party is going through the floor. Well, not through the floor, but it's gone down quite strikingly. So is it not the case that these voters are just waiting to come home into the welcoming arms of the Democratic Party? Patrick, what's wrong with that? Do you think it's just, is this just an evanescent reaction to some temporary economic problems, or do the Democrats have a case that this sort of revealed interest in the Republican Party is just extremely shallow and shaky, and they're going to come back to the Democrats the moment there's problems?
Well, it's always true that someone wins an election and everything looks everything looks peachy for their coalition, right? But then you get down to governing and you hit some road bumps. But the question is the sort of relative pecking order, let's say, of voters, right? Are kind of black voters uniquely moving away from Trump in a way that other kinds of voters are not, right? Is that what's happening here? I haven't seen much evidence of that. We'll see that, I'm sure it'll be revealed in elections, in the midterms, and in 2028. But you look at support for other Republican candidates, right, too, in the Trump era, that's also been going up. It's not quite at Trump levels, right, but it's also following the same trajectory, right? There is a down ballot lag. It's not like, everyone's kind of beating down the doors to join the Republican Party, right? There is a Trump effect, but that is also having an effect on these down ballot races, right? On the overall broader partisan alignment. And I think that's changed the way that Democrats have to campaign, right? Because I think that if you could count on, 96, 97% support in the black neighborhoods of Philadelphia with strong turnout, then your message is different than if your margin in Pennsylvania is carried almost exclusively in the suburbs.
Do you think they've absorbed that, though? I mean, maybe, I get the general impression, at least in some quarters of the Democratic Party, that if we just sort of like amp up the volume on how terrible Trump and his administration are, we'll bring these back. We don't have to campaign in any way that's responsive to some of the problems were revealed with the black vote in the last several cycles. Basically, it's a matter of taking advantage of the Republicans' mistake, pressing on the gas, and everything will be...
I think specifically with Trump, there was a sense, right, that, he is uniquely bad. He is uniquely worse than every other Republican that's run before. And if you're a white, college-educated voter, sure, yeah, he's worse than Romney was. He's worse than Bush was. If you're a black voter, that's the opposite is true. And I think, for a large segment of the electorate, the majority of the electorate, Trump was actually a stronger alternative, right? For many of these voters than previous iterations of traditional Republicans. And I'd say that's particularly true in the black community. I don't want to certainly he was a figure. He's been in hip hop songs. The Apprentice was a popular show in the black community, right? So I think that assumption, right, that Trump is just so uniquely toxic, it really turns out to be, really an assumption that's only true among a small sliver of the electorate that is white and college educated.
What do you think, Will? Do you buy that the Democrats are perhaps being too responsive to the views of white college-educated voters for whom Trump is the great Satan and they're not really understanding?
Absolutely. I think they completely not only do not understand, but misunderstand how to talk to normal people. And I'll get into that after one comment. I think that whichever party manages not to be crazy And this is something that advisors on the center right should keep really strongly in mind. Whichever party manages not to be completely nuts could easily hold power for the next 20 to 30 years. People are basically looking for someone to handle issues like healthcare, climate, winning wars, rebuilding our infrastructure. The antics of the last couple of presidents, I think, are a distraction from both of them. So if someone just wants to take up that adult mantle, grab the baton, and run like a traditional leader, I think people would love that. So that's one comment there. Obviously, if Trump manages to screw up the economy, I mean, most Black and Hispanic voters seem to think he's actually doing fairly well on the border, foreign affairs, although I'd actually disagree. But I mean, if he manages to screw up the economy, sure, he'll probably lose. Well, he can't lose. I mean, but Vance is not going to be president. But in terms of your comment, are the Democrats mishandling things by focusing on Trump as a unique devil figure? Yes, because they don't understand what people want. Most people don't want puling wokeness. If you're appealing to working class Black men by putting on kente cloth and crying in front of George Floyd's golden coffin, you just look like a little punk.
Great moments in Democratic history.
Yeah, I mean, but they really, I mean, the coffin was pulled by a coach in four. It's impossible to overstate this period. It was actually gilded. For my next book, I contacted someone at the company that makes golden coffins. They cost about $46,000. I mean, so you had like, these antics going on for some years at a time in an attempt to appeal to Black people. I don't know if you remember Hillary Clinton, I got my hot sauce in my purse.
Of course. Another classic.
Yeah, so I mean, just any political scientists have a book full of these. But I don't think that works. I think when people look at Trump and they see a big, confident boss figure who wears his ties too long and, probably has closed a deal or two in person, most people like that. And I don't think the Democrats really understand that to a crazy degree. This is a point that should be written about. I mean, the Democrats just fired David Hogg, who was one of the DNC chairs, for being male. Apparently they had one too many men, or white men, I forget which one it was, and they actually have gender quotas for their top leadership team, so they fired him. This is about 3 weeks after they fired Harry Sisson for caddish but consensual sex with women. So, I mean, I think if you're doing outreach in the hood, or in just any working class community, African American, Caucasian, whatever the case might be, this pitch is probably not going to work.
Okay, so this is a good opportunity to ask, well, what do Black voters want? What is particular working class Black man under 45, which is like a third of them voted for Trump? What do they really want? And what do they most like to see?
I think that it would be very similar to what most voters want with just cultural quirks. But I mean, I would say the image of leadership, one, and two, actual policies. So when I poll, I teach at a historically Black college. And when I talk to students who are 51% male in my field about the things that would make them go out and vote, which only about a third of them do. I mean, it's jobs, maybe criminal justice system reform. A lot of them say they need more police in their neighborhoods, which I think is one of those perspectives you hear a lot doing street work, almost never in public media. But I mean, so things like crime, maybe migration, job market, justice, those are all issues, but none of those issues have anything to do with shouting about Trump. And most people don't care about, I mean, so the idea of whether it's technically legal for Qatar to give Trump a replica Air Force One, I mean, I don't think it is, but it's not something that's going to really, if you go down to a trailer court and you're talking to people about healthcare policy, and you have the Democrats, the Republicans, that's not going to be ringing a lot of bells.
I've already read, I think, 4 articles claiming that this time we've got him. This is what's going to break the Trump
This technical violation of the emoluments clause will not stand.
Finally, we have him right where we want him. Yeah.
I mean, remember the signal controversy? That was going to be the thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
that was
it's
going to
like
bring the
hard to
whole
keep track
house of
of these,
cards
but
falling down.
There's a very important point here. We are all, and I mean, we are all educated members of the upper middle class. Many members of the, almost all members of the audience probably are, although a diverse range of origins here. But I mean, when you talk about these issues, it's important to realize that they're issues that almost no one cares about. Not just in my opinion, but based on a lot of very real data. The ultimate example of this is January 6th, where like we had a year plus of rioting on the left, then we saw some riots on the right, then we saw Kenosha. I mean, I might have the order a bit out of line, but you actually had a gunfight in the streets between left and right. Rittenhouse shot 3 people, a fight that became a gunfight. I don't think in that context, most people are particularly horrified by the pitch, they breached the Capitol. Now, it's a bad thing, But I wouldn't base campaign ads for the Democratic Party in 2028 on the fact that there was a riot on 6th of January 2021 during a year of riots, because nobody cares.
Yeah, I tend
So
to
there's
agree.
that.
Now, Patrick, what do you think then about going forward? Okay, so we had this kind of historic shift of the black vote in the last several cycles, particularly in the last election, toward the Republicans. We have this thermostatic reaction against Trump to some extent, where his approval rating has gone down among black voters. There seems to be some movement away from the GOP. How do you assess it going forward? And I guess maybe in a more prescriptive sense, you as a Republican pollster, what do you think Republicans need to do? Of course, you can't really control Trump, but what ideally should be done to like bring, keep that level of black support they had in 2024 and grow it further in the future? What prospects do you see for that?
I mean, the primary factor is economic stability and normalcy. When you ask what black voters want and what black male voters want, it's the same thing. That I think that they were promised, people were promised normalcy in 2020, but in very real ways, they got just more chaos, right? I mean, it wasn't just chaos in the West Wing; it was chaos in their daily lives, in their grocery bill, right? And that has been. And I think that was really kind of the foundation, right, of Trump, having the opportunity to make these gains, to, win over a lot of this kind of, what I would argue is low-hanging fruit voters who, were most on the fringes of the Biden economy. And he was able to make dramatic gains, not just with black voters, but with single voters, with non-college educated voters, with younger voters who generally have a more precarious economic situation. What people want is stability, right? People, did not feel like they were getting economically any kind of stability over the last 4 years, and that's why the tariffs were uniquely a dangerous event.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Are a
it's
dangerous
kind of,
and are a
arguably
risky event.
blowing it.
Now, maybe if that's being ratcheted back, that, he's the master deal maker and, he was able to bring other countries to heel. And as a result, his image is burnished as this master deal maker, right? That's one outcome. But I think that there's a risk, right, for the Republican Party of Donald Trump that if it's chasing, right, this sort of old blue-collar, upper Midwestern industrial in manufacturing revival, which was very much the 2016 Trump coalition, that to some extent ignores the newer voters, right, that are coming in that are never going to have a manufacturing job, that are never, kind of a young, that have never really had that history, right? I do think we need to be paying very close attention as a party to that voter.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a danger. Will, you agree with that sort of betting on the wrong economic horse here is a potential real liability for the Republicans?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the tariff scheme initiated by Trump at first seemed almost like a joke to me. I mean, the more hardcore Republicans in the room may disagree with that, but I mean, when he discussed things like putting a 10+% tariff on, it was every country on earth, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. No
The
exception.
Penguins, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was like the Faroe and Marshall Islands.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I think it was the Babylon Bee, maybe the Onion, that did a joke article where the president of this country, a penguin, responds. I mean, he definitely made a statement. But I don't view that as necessarily a logical economic policy. Again, I think that what'll matter more for the average information middle-class voter is how things turn out in practice, in the market, and also in coverage of these issues. So if the tariffs, if what probably is going to happen happens, and almost all the tariffs are scaled back, Trump gets 2 or 3 genuine policy wins, and he boasts about those for a month, I don't think the tariffs will have very much impact at a societal level at all. The big question for most people, like one of the whips used against Biden was literally the cost of eggs and meat, right?
Right.
So I think for most people, it's going to be when you go down to the store, are things cheaper? And that's why Trump the other day seized on this claim that gas was back to, I believe, $1.98 in some major municipality, because it matters if gas is $1.98. And if Trump can get gas to $1.98, he'll be fine. If not, if the price of things increases, he won't be.
Right. Well, what about, let's turn it around. How about the Democrats? What should they do to get, more of the black vote back to them and keep it? I mean, how can they reverse this several cycle trend they've had of the black vote moving away from them?
Well, I actually think this gets specifically into what I do research. And I mean, my response would be come up with a coherent plan for not just black voters, but working class voters that centers on something other than racism. I mean, the core claim of the American mainstream left for 50 or 60 years has been that every difference in performance between every group is due to this single variable of prejudice. And this is extended into sexism by feminist scholars. This has been extended. The whole idea of queer theory is that the same univariate praxis harms gay people. There's, what did Kimberly Crenshaw call it? I mean, there's the sort of faux regression where you can put 2 or 3 of them together, intersectionality.
Intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw, yeah.
But I mean, so you can get as many as 4 independent variables in there. But I mean, you can predict
Revolutionary idea.
crazy stuff. Yeah. But in all seriousness, you can then predict how an individual's life will turn out via this model. I think most people in 2025, where the highest earning group in the country by far is Indian Americans, are beginning to realize that this probably isn't true. So when African American voters ask, why is there such an extremely high rate of crime in these cities that are governed by Democrats, that are more than 50% black, these are the questions I hear every day. What's your plan to deal with that? You don't want police abuse, neither do we, but we have body cams on the cops now. What else are you going to do? And I don't really hear a lot of answers. This is an important point, actually. I don't hear a lot of answers.
Problem like that, basically it's a luxury belief problem. Luxury beliefs of the white upper class liberals who tend to dominate so much of the Democratic Party. That's what they believe is true about the world and what they're very committed to, and it's sort of part of their identity.
Well,
so for the Democrats to move away from that kind of way of talking about inequality would be very hard, right?
If I could jump in there for another kind of half-length response, yeah, I think this is going to be the big issue for the Democratic Party is whether they can get rid of sort of the dead weight from what I think of as the Jesse Jackson era. Like, I mean, this basic idea that everything in society is caused by this one external devil, and we've now found a few more smaller external devils we're also going to focus on. It's going to be hard to get past that. I mean, the David Hogg firing happened 2 days ago. So, I mean, the question is, if they run on, and they seem to be holding the line on quote unquote trans rights.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that high school age former varsity athlete boys can compete with the girls.
Right. A Maine Democrat just got censured and prohibited from voting.
Really?
Because they had criticized, the stand of the Democratic Party on transgender guys. I mean, incredible. I mean, just literally like preventing them from participating in the legislature because they said the wrong thing.
The problem is that once you adopt a civil rights framework, like differences in performance between Group A and Group B are caused by discrimination, every time you see a difference in performance between a large Group A and a large Group B, you have to assume discrimination, right? So, I mean, you've gone from African American civil rights, which are obviously a justified cause, to the later waves of feminism, arguable, to gay rights, okay, to trans rights. I mean, like, there's always going to be someone who is excluded.
Always a new frontier.
But the question becomes when you look at, and this is very marginal even now, but like the attempt to redefine pedophilia as being a minor attracted person. That's obviously not the mainstream of either party. But I mean, there's always going to be some group that is outside of society. The question is, how often is that justified? If you're talking about felons, vagrants, so on down the line.
Yeah. Patrick, do you want to jump in here? How should the Democrats fix themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge how difficult it's going to be in this narrow respect, right? Because you're already seeing it, right? After the election, there were real conversations about how do we need to fix ourselves? How do we need to do this? And then
it's a very white male question, Patrick.
Right? Yeah, right. And then and what do we need to do to move to the center? You have several Democratic senators voting through the Lake and Riley Act.
Right. Yeah.
Usually it's John Fetterman. Now John Fetterman is persona non grata, and he's they're trying to run him out of the party, right? And it's been 6 months. It's and to some extent, right, the revival of Democratic fortunes, let's say, or the turnout, the turnout surge they're probably going to see in the midterm elections, right, forestalls any kind of question about, right, because if you have a short-term energy boost by just being, we're just not Trump, we're not the party in power. and we win a whole bunch of low turnout special elections. Oh, we don't need to change. But you're still back at square one in the presidential year, right? So you still haven't solved the underlying problem that caused you to lose. And we do well in midterm and special elections, right? And great, pat yourself on the back. That's the 2010s Obama era Republican Party. So I think it seems to be difficult, right, for Democrats to stay on track with a message. I still think that culturally, I think they need to punch left. I mean, it's not just about, we're going to gradually just reposition ourselves quietly, right? And that seems to be like the mode of thinking. We're just going to talk about economics. We're just going to talk about economic populism, maybe like run AOC or talk about economic issues in sort of that Bernie mode while saying nothing and being silent on these cultural issues. Meanwhile, that's what voters care about. Right? I mean, there's a lot of discussion about. And you need to very clearly differentiate yourself if you're going to actually get people to sit up and take notice on the cultural issues. I agree, by the way, with a focus on just more just middle-class economic normalcy as sort of your economic agenda, and that's true of both parties. But if you are looking to really detoxify the Democratic brand, you need somebody who has, can make very sharp and high-profile breaks with
Wait
the
a minute,
left.
you're saying actually change their positions?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Crazy.
What a crazy idea,
Yeah.
Matt Iglesias called that dog whistle moderation, where a lot of
Yeah.
Democrats are now going around saying, I'm really pretty moderate, and I think we've been too weak and woke and all that. But the positions don't change. They're exactly the same positions. So anyway, I want to ask, should we be getting into question time here? I wasn't sure about how much time we had for the discussion. Okay, well, let's just do questions then. I'm sure the audience has a few. Right over there.
I'd like to ask Will and Patrick to speak a little bit more about the gender dynamics. And I actually think this speaks directly to the issues of family. First, let me make an observation. I think the most significant interracial marriage in the history of this country has been between black feminists and white liberals, because it's been powering the Democratic Party for the better part of 60 years. In the 60s, that sort of worked itself out in sort of welfare culture. But today, the party is a party of political patronage, which is why they say black women save democracy. They tell black men to get in line behind black women. And I don't think we talk enough about the extent to which that exerts pressure, even within the household, because the party benefits from saying, basically the message to black women is vote for us and we'll make you vice president or Supreme Court justice. The message to black men is vote for us and we'll keep you from being George Floyd or Jacob Blake. So I'd like you all to talk more about how the gender dynamics within the black community impact how people sort of express themselves at the polls.
I go first. I guess we're going in order. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So, I mean, there's no real doubt that the core of the Democratic Party right now is upper middle class, but really this sweeps across a lot of social classes, predominantly single, especially educated women. I mean, there's a graphic that went viral on social media a couple of weeks ago, but that's actually sourced from survey work done at, I believe, Penn. And it was attitudes toward Trump. And it was, I believe, males uneducated, this would include blacks, Hispanics, whatnot, plus 38. Males educated, plus 13. Women not very educated, plus 30. Someone in the audience might correct me. Educated women, minus 39. Yeah, those are graphic numbers. Okay, so that's something that you can't ignore. And I think the Democrats have very definitely embraced what I would call the later waves of feminism, which is where you get gender ideology, Judith Butler, so on. And I think a lot of people that are outside of academic discourse don't understand how different that is from women are equally capable of being director level executives. I mean, there's a lot of stuff of 80% of masculinity is toxic, is something that would be taught in many colleges. This is all very much associated with the Democrats rather than the GOP. And by the way, I think all politicians anywhere in the world, I'm doing a look at Latin America right now, kind of embarrassingly pitch to their audience So if someone is doing an ad where they're shooting an Armalite rifle at a bunch of beer bottles with an American flag flying in the background and like 2 Labradors running around, that's the GOP. You know, so do the Democrats do the same thing with the women that we sometimes do when we try to pitch to guys? Yes. I do think that's pretty problematic. The one thing here, I don't think that's something you can fix at the ballot box. There has to be a deeper solution. Because what we actually find, there's a famous old poem called Deadlier Than the Male, which makes the point in passing that women become very ruthlessly committed to their families and fairly conservative when they have traditional model families. And are often, although at a subtle level, to some extent the head of those families. They have a lot of influence on purchasing decisions, movement decisions, so on. But that requires the family. So I mean, the GOP, if we really want to fix that, would have to start pitching things like proposing to men. I mean, right now, the average man makes his first marriage proposal at 32, gets married at 33, average woman gets married at 31. So there's a whole systemic pattern that you're going to have to interact with there. There's going to include a lot of training for the guys as well to change that. But yeah, you do see those demographics. The Republicans are becoming the bro and working class party. And the Democrats are becoming the angry woman and minorities we hope we can keep in the House party. And that neither one of those is more legitimate than the other, but I think the Democratic model is worse for society. So I think the question is people, and perhaps especially as conservative-leaning men, is how do we fix that? Otherwise, those voting patterns, those are going to stay as they are.
What do you think, Patrick?
No, I mean, statistically, right? So this is one of the starker examples of a gender divide that we see. But I think if you just look at the raw, like just the percentage numbers, that if it's 6 or 7% voted for Trump among black women and 20% among black men,
Yes.
right? That means that if you're in a couple, right, that's a same race couple, that 2 out of every 3 of the Trump voting black males are with somebody who's a Kamala voter, right? That's just an very, very unique dynamic that you don't really see anywhere else. And I've done like, you know, some more research lately. Right, lately I've been focused on sort of this whole idea of this Gen Z gender gap, right? And I think it's obvious, it's absolutely really important. But where you really see it raging, right, is in the Gen Z single, and it's really a single gender gap where you don't have anyone else in a relationship that kind of is conditioning your beliefs or tempering your beliefs in some way. So you see just in general, right, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if actually it was the case that support for Trump was specifically strongest, right? If the idea, the sort of family breakdown dynamics actually didn't benefit Trump among men because, you know, they're kind of a lone wolf and they're going off in their own direction, right? That's what seems to happen with single voters overall. So I think those gender dynamics are just, it's very, very stark, I would say.
Could I jump in there for a second?
Sure.
I actually think this is one of the biggest rising problems in society. I mean, if you look at polarization among single young men and women, I mean, I think women have moved 23 points more to the left. But it's not just women. Like the guys have moved, I believe, 12 points to the right. I don't have this graphic in front of me, but you've gone from about a 10-point gap to this incredible 35-point gap between men and women who now view each other as insane. And this is really enhanced in these social media spaces where you've got influence movements from Kill All Men to Andrew Tate driving shirtless in a Bugatti. I mean, so it's the goal of media and certainly of social media is to monetize anger. It's very important to keep that in mind. That is the goal of non-book length media. So when you see this stuff, obviously it's very damaging for society. These are the worst imaginable models for men, probably for women as well. I have less experience with that if you haven't gendered me. But I mean, so again, it's a serious problem that men and women are 35 points apart on a standard political spectrum. And we're again, socially going to have to take steps to fix that. The best way to fix that would be to have a normal family with a mother and a father teaching both men and women what the opposite sex is like and how to behave as an adult human being. But we have a problem with that as well. So this is something that society is going to have to actively engage pretty soon. There's not really a happy ending moment on that data that I've seen.
Other questions? How about back there?
Hi, thank you so much for this panel, and I'm glad you all brought up the gender discourse / wars that are happening online right now, because I'm hearing a lot about, two-parent households and incentivizing marriage, but I guess my question is, when there is this sort of raging debate that's arguing, marriage isn't economically smart for men because of divorce, even though data shows like married men live longer, they earn more, and then you have like the 4B movement where women are sort of discouraged from marriage as well. Practically, what do you do to change that sort of cultural discourse among young people?
Do you mind if I respond for all right. Yeah, I think we're all going to have an opinion on that. So I think at some level in society right now, we're almost teaching anti-civilization. It's true to a striking degree, like the 1619 Project, which argues that the United States is founded on racism and genocide. Not that those things happened during an era when the right of conquest was international law, but that's the basis of the country, versus, say, the Constitution. We started in 1619. That's taught in the schools. Third wave feminist theory is pretty frequently, although you usually have to sign up for elective classes to take it. For the guys, it's not as formalized, but again, the primary male influencers online, I would say, are almost entirely negative. So you have constant telling people things matters. And the things that we're telling people from a very young age today are, to put this in crude terms, bad. How do you promote something like marriage? I mean, the ideal model would be that in the schools, you teach people that marriage is good. You teach people not to break the law. You don't propagandize too much, but you have a basically positive view of the country that is taught to children, just as would be the case in China, most of the states of India, so on down the line. So I guess that would be the answer. If I have to make one comment here, it's also important to realize that for the men, but also for the women, because I think most people still associate feminism with a much needed, much earlier movement, this stuff is almost entirely negative. Like 4B is not going to bring you to a positive place. When I was looking up data for my next book, one of the most striking statistics that I observed, right up there with African American and young Latino crime rates, was that 56% of young liberal women, this may be white women, are technically mentally ill. Like a formal diagnosis from a licensed therapist that you are crazy. And that correlates directly with being in a stable relationship. Like, men can do a lot of bad things. Abuse from men should not be tolerated. We should keep the divorce laws in place. But the basic idea that it's good not to have a heterosexual love partner is crazy. I mean, it's impossible to imagine any member of, how would you put it, a mammal predator species believing that. So we need to shut down the nonsense. An additional point there would also be that women and men need to recognize that there are responsibilities, commitments that come with something like marriage. Every time I scroll on Twitter, and I'm going to keep this very PG-13, but I see all these polls like, is it abusive for my woman to expect me to get a job? I.e. to cut down things like video gaming, your personal life, athletics, so on. Is it abusive for my man to expect me to sometimes sleep with him? Just like, and those are both two things. You can literally go to my Twitter site, which I'm not going to give out in public. I mean, you can literally just go look at them on public popular media. And I think that this lack of understanding of the basic rules of civitas, like how humans do things, is a real problem. I, as a guy, think it's a bit more of a problem for guys, but it's something that's going to cause you a great deal of discomfort in life if you are actively doing things like saying, I hate love, which is one of the 4B shirts. I hate love is a dumb slogan.
Right.
That's all I got.
One reason I stay off of Twitter. Patrick, you have a comment?
The only thing I would add, but the only thing I would add is, so much of the media, I mean, especially is now in social media, and social media is heavily gendered, right? I mean, it's sort of the most popular. You look at the list of the most popular podcasts. They're podcasts that there's no podcast that tries to appeal to everyone. That's not a successful formula for a winning podcast. It's usually a podcast that appeals exclusively to one segment of the population, either male or female. So I think that's a commentary, right, on where we are. That if you're looking at a phenomenon of men and women going further and further apart, absolutely need to look at what's happening in the media.
Yeah, I mean the biggest gaps are under 30 men and women, right? And particularly in ideology. I mean the liberal ideology identification of women under 30 is absolutely through the roof. I mean, and what is like a 40-point gap or something? I mean, it's insane. So
We had I was looking at one of our polls recently, and the marriage gap is pretty striking. Where and I was looking at I think it was among single women. There was like, it was somewhere between 8 and 12% strongly approve of Donald Trump. Among married women, 40% strongly approve of Donald Trump. So it's a divide, but it's also a marriage, also very much of a marriage divide.
And another thing about that is that that's not just caused by selection effects. Like when single women get married, as you know better than I do, and have 1 or 2 kids, stable, normal husband, they start shifting to the right. And men actually move a bit left. So talking to an intelligent person that you respect about the issues of the day is going to remove the possibility of the most extreme kind of radicalism, usually. But we do that less than ever before now.
that's it. Everybody's got to get married. Any other questions out here? Yes,
Get
over
rich
there.
too.
Yeah, I had a question. We talked a little bit about like voters under 30 and the youth, and even speaking for myself, someone whose earliest memory of a presidential election was 2008 with Obama. Coming of age during 2016, first election that I was able to vote in is 2020. As we discussed, pretty chaotic and divisive times. I wondered what you all think about, at least in the short term, what role that will play in young voters in terms of how they think about what it means to engage in politics, what that looks like, the kind of norms in how you do that, talking to other people, voting, et cetera.
Well, I think if you're asking, so people that are coming up right now are coming up in an era that's very racially hostile, very gender hostile. A lot of it's shaped by social media, by the podcast game, so on. I think a lot of people are going to act like jackasses until otherwise trained. I mean, if you look at a lot of so one of the major debate sites online is called Whatever. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's 2 Christian guys that have on women who work on the website OnlyFans. I'm not sure what that is. But, they just scream at each other for 8 hours. My own partner had this on in the background, and it was one of the few put foot down times I've had. Like, turn this crap off and try to write. But it's, that is, I think, how many people view gender discourse, how many people view racial discourse. And I mean, even content that I would listen to, if you turn on anything from the Daily Wire to the Young Turks, I mean, you're very definitely going to hear that sort of often angry perspective from one side. There's nothing wrong with the business model for either of those, but it all comes down to you have to teach people that fiction is not reality. Like last story probably for me today, but when I was 8, I was watching a movie with my uncle, Ronald Earl, who's a military veteran. And there's a scene in the movie where a guy gets hit over the head with a chair, the chair splinters into pieces. The guy who got hit with the chair stands up and beats up the other guy who hit him with the chair. And my uncle actually paused the television and he was like, that ain't how fighting works. I mean, and
Good point. Good point.
I think that there need to be people who I'm going to focus on young men because I was one, but you need to tell people that's not how, let's say, dating works. That's not how conversation works. That's not how marriage works. And I think our goal should be to get as many of those people out there in society that can say that ain't how fighting works as possible.
Final comment, Patrick?
No, I mean, look, I think we've seen a generational shift, but this election wasn't just a racial shift; it was a generational shift, and you've seen really the narrowest gap among voters by age group, and you're seeing younger men in particular, but younger voters in general, kind of trending more conservative, and that that's probably going to have an impact, right? I mean, the political science on this has been pretty clear that the first 2 or 3 elections you vote in, right, that kind of does set your course for life. So you definitely are going to have potentially a generation of people, right, who kind of upend this sort of narrative of kind of if you're of the left-wing young person, right? So I think it'll be an interesting trend to watch.
A lot of trends to watch. I'm told we're out of time, so I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and thanks for listening.